This happened to me about 3 years ago when I was 24 and flying back home to Phoenix from a business conference in Miami. I was working for this small marketing company at the time, and honestly, I hated traveling alone, especially those late-night flights that leave you stranded in random airports at ungodly hours. My original flight got delayed due to weather, which meant I missed my connection in Atlanta. The airline rebooked me on this red-eye flight that didn't leave until 2:15 a.m., giving me a 6-hour layover in what had to be the most depressing airport terminal I'd ever seen. I'm talking about Terminal C at Memphis International, one of those older terminals that feels like it was built in the 80s and hasn't been updated since. By 11 p.m., most of the shops had closed and the terminal was practically empty, except for a few other stranded passengers scattered around. I found myself camping out near Gate C-14, which was at the very end of this long, dimly lit corridor. The gate area had maybe 20 seats total, and I was the only person there. I remember thinking I'd rather be alone than sitting near the few weird people I'd spotted wandering around. You know how airports attract strange characters late at night? I had my laptop out trying to get some work done when I first noticed him. It was around 11:30 p.m., and this guy walks past my gate area for the third time in 20 minutes. He was maybe in his 50s, wearing this wrinkled business suit that looked like he'd been sleeping in it, and he had this nervous energy about him. Every time he walked by, he'd slow down and glance in my direction, but when I'd look up, he'd quickly look away and keep walking. At first, I figured he was just another delayed passenger killing time, walking around to stay awake. I'll admit, I do the same thing sometimes during long layovers, but something about the way he moved, the way he kept looking at me, made me uncomfortable. There was this intensity to his stare that made my skin crawl. Around midnight, I decided to move closer to the main terminal area where there were more people and better lighting. I packed up my stuff and walked toward the central hub, passing a few 24-hour restaurants and newsstands that were still open. I found a seat near a subway that was about to close, thinking I'd be safer around other people. But 20 minutes later, there he was again. This time he sat down directly across from me, maybe 15 feet away, and he wasn't even pretending not to stare anymore. He had this small black notebook that he kept writing in, and every few minutes he'd look up at me, make a note, then go back to writing. I remember my heart starting to race because this was way beyond coincidental. This guy was definitely watching me. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just a weird businessman with social anxiety or something. But when I got up to use the bathroom, I noticed him immediately close his notebook and stand up too. That's when I knew for sure something was wrong. The bathroom was one of those small ones with just 2 stalls, and I could hear his footsteps following me down the hallway. I went into the first stall and locked it, my hands shaking as I tried to think of what to do. I could hear him enter the bathroom, and then nothing. Complete silence. He wasn't using the other stall or the urinals. He was just standing there, waiting. I'll never forget the next few minutes. I stayed in that stall for what felt like forever, checking my watch every 30 seconds. 12:47 a.m., 12:48 a.m., 12:49 a.m. I could hear him shifting his weight, the sound of his shoes on the tile floor. Occasionally, he'd clear his throat or make this weird humming sound under his breath. I was too scared to come out, but I couldn't stay in there forever. When I finally opened the stall door, he was standing right there, maybe 3 feet away, facing the stalls. Not using the urinal, not washing his hands, just standing there with that same intense stare. Up close, I could see his eyes were bloodshot, and he had this nervous tic where he kept licking his lips. His notebook was clutched in his left hand. "Long layover?" he said, and his voice was raspy, like he'd been smoking for decades. I just nodded and tried to get past him to the sinks, but he stepped slightly to the side, blocking my path. "Where are you headed?" he asked, but I pretended not to hear him and pushed past him to wash my hands. In the mirror, I could see he was still staring at me. and now he was smiling this creepy, knowing smile. I dried my hands as quickly as possible and walked out, but I could hear his footsteps behind me again. When I got back to the main terminal area, I looked around desperately for airport security or police, but the place was practically deserted. The subway had closed while I was in the bathroom, and most of the other passengers had disappeared. I decided to find a spot near one of the few remaining open shops, thinking the employees might notice if something happened. There was this little newsstand that stayed open all night, and I sat down at a nearby charging station where I could see the elderly clerk behind the counter. But the guy followed me there too. This time, he sat down at the charging station right next to mine, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with cigarette smoke and something else, something stale and unpleasant. He opened his notebook again and went back to writing, but now he wasn't even trying to hide what he was doing. He'd write something, look at me, write something else, look at me again. I remember thinking about calling 911, but what would I tell them? That some guy was following me around an airport and writing in a notebook? It sounds stupid when you say it out loud, but sitting there at 1 a.m. in that empty terminal, with this man watching my every move, I was genuinely terrified. Around 1:15 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and walked directly to the newsstand clerk, a woman in her 60s who looked like she'd been working there forever. I pretended to browse magazines while quietly explaining the situation to her. She glanced over at the guy, and I saw her expression change immediately. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "That man's been bothering people all week. Security's been looking for him, but he always disappears when they show up." That's when I knew I was in real danger. This wasn't just some socially awkward traveler. This was someone who had been targeting people in this airport for days. The clerk immediately called security, speaking in hushed tones while keeping an eye on the man. Within minutes, 2 airport security officers arrived. When the man saw them approaching, he quickly closed his notebook and stood up. But instead of running, he walked straight toward me. I'll never forget what he said as the security officers grabbed his arms. "I know where you live, Sarah. I know everything about you." The thing is, my name isn't Sarah. I never told him my name, and my boarding pass wasn't visible. But the way he said it, with such certainty, made my blood run cold. It was like he was threatening some other woman, someone he'd been watching before me. The security officers escorted him away, and one of them took my statement. They found his notebook, which was filled with detailed observations about various female passengers, their flight numbers, gate locations, layover times, even descriptions of their clothing and luggage. There were at least 15 different women documented in that notebook, including several pages about me from just that one night. They told me he'd been banned from the airport twice before, but kept finding ways to get back in. He'd been targeting women traveling alone, following them around terminals, and in at least 2 cases, he'd somehow gotten their personal information and contacted them after their flights. I made my 2:15 a.m. flight, but I didn't sleep at all during the 3-hour trip to Phoenix. I kept thinking about what the security officer had told me, that this guy had been doing this for weeks, maybe months. How many other women had he followed? How many had he actually contacted afterward? The worst part is, I never found out what happened to him. Airport security said they'd turn him over to local police, but when I tried to follow up a few weeks later, nobody could give me any information. The airline couldn't tell me anything either, citing privacy policies. To this day, 3 years later, I still get nervous during layovers, especially late at night. I always sit near security checkpoints or gate agents, and I never travel alone if I can help it. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, still watching women in airports, still writing in his notebook. The thing that haunts me most is that name, Sarah. Somewhere out there, there's a woman named Sarah who this man was obsessed with, and she might not even know it. I hope she's safe, wherever she is.